In this module, we'll turn ISO IEC 1421 expectations into a practical readiness check. You'll assess current governance and architecture, uncover evidence and operational gaps, judge control maturity, and prioritize fixes by risk, effort, and certification impact. So far, you've built the core AIMS foundation: scope, inventory, governance, architecture, operational controls, and evidence. Now the focus shifts from understanding the components to testing readiness. The goal is to identify gaps, assess maturity, and prioritize remediation before internal audit and certification preparation. A gap assessment is the reality check before implementation moves too far. It compares how AI is governed today against ISO IEC 4020-001 requirements, Annex controls, your policies, and the defined AIMS scope. The purpose is not just to find missing documents. It is to test whether controls are well designed, consistently used, and supported by evidence. The output should be practical: a prioritized remediation plan that shows what to fix first, who owns it, and what evidence will demonstrate certification readiness. A strong gap assessment tests reality, not paperwork. Start by planning the scope and criteria. Then collect the core evidence: policies, procedures, architecture artifacts, AI inventories, risk records, impact assessments, and prior evidence packs. Next, interview the people accountable for decisions and operations, including owners, architects, risk, security, legal, platform, and operations teams. Then inspect how controls appear in architecture and workflows. Finally, sample actual AI systems to evaluate whether AIMS practices are applied consistently, traceably, and effectively. Evidence review is where governance claims become proof. Begin with the core AIMS documents: scope, policy, objectives, roles, risk method, AI inventory, impact assessments, and control procedures. Then check whether those documents are reflected in real delivery artifacts, such as architecture diagrams, model cards, data lineage, monitoring reports, approvals, incident logs, and change records. The key is traceability. Each requirement should connect to a control, each control to an implementation, and each implementation to operational evidence. Weak evidence often appears as outdated files, missing approvals, inconsistent templates, or claims no one can verify. Stakeholder interviews test whether the AI management system is real in practice, not just well documented. Governance owners should be able to explain scope, objectives, accountability, and how risk is accepted or escalated. Architects and engineers should describe how controls operate across the data and model lifecycle, including monitoring, security, and deployment gates. Compliance, legal, and risk teams should connect obligations to impact assessments and evidence. The key is comparison. When interview answers do not match procedures or system records, you have found an implementation gap worth investigating. Architecture review asks a practical question: where do the controls actually live? Strong AI governance is not a document sitting beside the system. It is built into data pipelines, model behavior, application logic, platform operations, infrastructure, and approval workflows. Reviewers trace data flows, APIs, model components, logging, monitoring, security boundaries, and human oversight points. For GenAI, they also look for prompt filtering, retrieval controls, output monitoring, content safety, and escalation paths. The goal is to find design gaps early, such as weak access, missing lineage, unmanaged third-party models, limited explainability, or monitoring that starts too late. Process assessment looks at whether governance actually happens from start to finish. Follow an AI use case from intake through risk assessment, design, testing, approval, deployment, monitoring, and retirement. At each gate, look for clear owners, decision rights, escalation paths, and separation of duties. The evidence should show repeatable workflows, documented approvals, and consistent risk classification. Weak processes often show up as informal sign-offs, skipped revalidation, unclear handoffs, or incident steps no one owns. The goal is to confirm that lifecycle controls work end-to-end under real operating conditions. Sampling proves the AIMS is not just working for one flagship project. Start from the AI inventory and choose a representative mix: high-risk systems, production-critical models, Gen AI or LLM use cases, third-party tools, and systems that recently changed. Include different lifecycle stages, from development through decommissioning. For each sample, test the same evidence set: risk assessment, approval, documentation, monitoring, and controls. Look for the pattern. One failed file may be a project issue. Repeated gaps across units or technologies point to a systemic weakness in the aims. Control effectiveness comes down to two questions. First, was the control designed well? It should match the risk, map to a requirement, have an accountable owner, and be built into the process or architecture. Second, does it operate as intended? People should execute it consistently. Evidence should exist, monitoring should occur, and outcomes should reduce the risk. Assess preventive, detective, and corrective controls across governance, data, model lifecycle, security, monitoring, and incident response. Then document findings with severity, evidence, affected systems, root cause, and clear remediation actions. Control maturity is a practical way to judge how dependable a control really is. At the lowest level, there is no implemented control, so there is no evidence to rely on. Ad hoc controls may work, but only because certain people remember to perform them. Defined controls are documented, assigned, and aligned with ISO IEC 4020-01, but consistency is still developing. Higher maturity means the control operates routinely, produces evidence, and is measured. The strongest state is continuous improvement, where review results, incidents, and metrics are used to refine the control over time. A maturity score turns assessment evidence into something leaders can compare and defend. For each requirement, score the basics separately, whether it is documented, implemented, supported by strong evidence, applied consistently, and measured over time. Keep that score distinct from risk severity. A weak control in a low-impact area is different from the same weakness protecting a high-risk AI system. Once scored, use a heat map to reveal patterns across governance, data, model operations, security, monitoring, and incident response. Most importantly, record the rationale and evidence links so the result is repeatable and audit-ready. Remediation is not about fixing everything at once. It is about sequencing work so the biggest exposures shrink first. Start with gaps that combine high risk and strong certification impact, especially in regulated, safety-critical, or customer-facing AI systems. Then consider effort, dependencies, tooling, process changes, and whether teams can realistically execute. Low-effort, high-impact items become quick wins. High-effort, high-impact items become strategic projects that need sponsorship and planning. Lower-impact issues can be monitored or scheduled later. Finally, overlay regulatory deadlines and business criticality so the roadmap is both defensible and realistic. Once gaps are confirmed, turn them into controlled work, not informal good intentions. Each remediation action needs an owner, due date, acceptance criteria, affected systems, and the evidence required to prove completion. Prioritize the roadmap in phases. Immediate certification blockers in the first 30 days, maturity improvements over the next 31 to 90 days, and longer-term continuous improvement after that. As work closes, update the aims documentation and evidence pack. Progress should be reviewed through governance meetings, dashboards, management review inputs, and internal audit preparation. Effective ISO IEC 1421 implementation is not just about producing documents. It is about proving how controls work, where gaps remain, and how mature each practice really is. Use evidence reviews, interviews, architecture and process checks, AI system sampling, and control testing to prioritize remediation by risk, effort, urgency, and business impact. That foundation prepares you for internal audit, management review, and certification readiness.